How's it going? Thad Brown here with you on the Endgame. You're watching Rochester First. Thanks also to our WIVB Plus viewers today. Obviously a huge day when it comes to Western New York sports. Sean McDermott fired as the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. We're going to go in through all of the different parts of this, why McDermott was let go, why it might make sense, why it might not make sense, why Brandon Beane is the one who stays, and what that means for the Bills going forward. And there's a good chance, too, we will get into a little bit more of what happened on Saturday with the Bills' playoff loss to the Denver Broncos. But again, Sean McDermott fired. And right off the top, this is a surprise, I think, to most of us who cover the team. I think most of us have told, I know I've done another number of interviews where people have asked, what do you think? Is this something where Sean McDermott would be on the hot seat? And my answer has been flatly no. This is not a coach that's going to be fired. There is too much of a relationship, we thought, with Josh Allen. Remember, this is a coach that was invited to Josh Allen's wedding over the summer. Brandon Beane was not when it comes to which guy stayed and which guy didn't. I didn't think that Terry Pegula would want to take this big a swing. Remember, this is an owner that has not really done a whole lot well when it comes to his other sports team. And I wasn't someone who was confident that Pegula would want to open up that door with the one thing that was working. Yes, it wasn't working to a Super Bowl level, but it was working at a higher level than most other organizations in the NFL. But apparently, Terry Pegula today decided that this was the right move for his franchise. And he talked about how there needed to be new structure within the leadership in order to get this team to the next level, is what Terry Pegula said today in a statement. There will be no interviews today, by the way, at One Bills Drive. No Brandon Beane, no Terry Pegula talking to media, no anything. We will hear, or we'll talk about a little bit here about what some of the players had to say, at least on social media, about this move. But again, this was a big shock, I think, to anyone who has covered the team, who has followed the team, that McDermott would be fired at this juncture. And there's all kinds of moving parts that go to it. When you fire a coach this deep into the coaching search season, and I know it's only 2 weeks into the postseason, but we're pretty far into this thing already, to the point where John Harbaugh and Kevin Stefanski, who would probably be choice A and B for anybody who needs a coach this offseason, including the Bills, those guys are not available. So now the Bills are already shopping in the aisle of something that's been picked over a little bit. The best deals are gone. It doesn't mean that there isn't a number of guys out there who would work really well for Buffalo, and we'll talk about that a little later on too. But you're already coming at this behind where some other teams are when it comes to searching for a new coach. McDermott, over his 9 years, second winningest coach in the NFL, only behind the Chiefs. 98 wins, 50 losses in 9 seasons. Of course, went to the playoffs 8 different times, won 5 divisions. But the thing that obviously got Sean McDermott fired is the inability to get the Bills over the hump. There are going to be, when you look at the Sean McDermott resume with Buffalo, there are going to be so many entries which are the Bills had the most X without going to a Super Bowl. The Bills did this the most times without going to a Super Bowl. They're the only team in NFL history to win 5 consecutive division titles and not make the Super Bowl one time in any of those seasons. The Bills have won or have gone to the divisional round 6 different times. And there was a graphic that was posted last week that the other 3 teams to do that all won 3 Super Bowls, who made the divisional round 6 years in a row. I think it was Patriots, Chiefs, and Steelers, maybe. I shouldn't say 3 Super Bowls in a row, but won 3 Super Bowls at one point after going to the divisional 6 years in a row. The Bills, of course, haven't even been to a Super Bowl, let alone winning one. So this is reason A why McDermott is gone. It's not because the team is tired of him in terms of the players. It's not because the locker room had a problem with McDermott or there was any sort of at least personality conflicts when it comes to McDermott and his players. Shaq Thompson just yesterday raved about how players would go through a wall for Sean McDermott. So this is not about discord in the locker room. This might be a little bit about a coach's voice that has gotten tired, at least within the organization, but not for the guys. Man, you go through every single player's social media today, and they are all unhappy about McDermott being gone. Again, the surprise, McDermott being fired is certainly a surprise. The bigger surprise in all of this, though, is that Brandon Beane is the one who stays. And not only stays, but gets promoted. Again, when you look at this, when you think about, if you want to make a change in Buffalo, if you feel like, if you're Terry Pegula and you say, look, this is not working, we have to do something different. All right, well, the obvious two things to do are to fire the head coach, or I guess there's three things. Fire the head coach, fire the GM, fire both. If you are choosing between Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott is a guy who has probably the better relationship with the quarterback. We talked about the fact that he went to the wedding. Just logically, when it comes to how you work every day as a quarterback, you see the head coach all the time. Maybe not constantly every day. Generally, when you're playing professional football, the coach that you see the most is your position coach. That's your guy. That's the guy you come in and talk to and work with all the time. Now, when you're the quarterback, I'm sure you deal with the offensive coordinator and the head coach way more than anybody else in the team does. But regardless, whatever coach has Allen's attention the most, that coach certainly has Allen's attention more than the GM does. This is not, Brandon Beane's not something or someone that Josh Allen works with or talks to every single day and makes him a part of his regular daily life. So based on that, it's reasonable to assume that McDermott had the better relationship with the quarterback. So again, if you're picking one or two and your quarterback is your guy, I don't care what you want to say about who should have the power, how an organization should be structured. When you have a quarterback of Josh Allen's level, Josh Allen's salary, and Josh Allen's appreciation among your fan base, he's the guy. So again, if you're going to choose between the head coach and the GM, the guy with a better relationship with the quarterback is probably where I would start. And then on top of that, if you look at the two resumes, what each guy has done recently, or if you want to, over the duration of their career, both have been good at their jobs. There is no way you look at what Sean McDermott or Brandon Beane have done in the 9 years they've been with the Bills and say they did a bad job. I know some fans want to say, oh, it's just Josh Allen. Anyone could have done it. That ain't how it works. And if you don't believe me, the Chargers have had Justin Herbert for almost about the same amount of time, and they can't figure their way out of a paper bag most years. So it is not just that easy. Beane and McDermott have both done good jobs, but recently, especially this year, you think about what McDermott had to deal with in terms of the injuries on defense. Michael Hoyt gone for the year. Ed Oliver basically not a part of the team. Dwayne Carter gone for the year. That's just the defensive line. Ran through linebackers all season long. Shaq Thompson was hurt. Matt Milano was hurt. Terrell Bernard was hurt. Went through two starting safeties, Taylor Rapp to Jordan Poyer, then to whoever they had to be on the field for the last two games. Max Hairston got hurt in training camp. Was not really ever a part of the team. That's the first pick. The first pick, the second pick, and the third pick in the draft all had major injuries this year. And McDermott still had this defense, this pass defense, as the number one pass defense in the NFL. And even though they allowed 33 points in that playoff game on Saturday, the reason that McDermott, or the reason the Bills primarily still had a chance in that game, is because in the second half, McDermott's defense was absolutely smothering the Denver Broncos. McDermott did a good job this year. Maybe not the best job, maybe not a perfect job, certainly not a good enough job to get his team to a Super Bowl, which is generally the bar around here. But he did pretty good. Now let's flip it to the Brandon Beane side of this, right? Let's talk about what his season was like. Again, the first three picks in the draft that he used their top draft assets on, yes, they all got hurt. And that is 1,000% a factor when it comes to this. That the guys Brandon Beane committed the most draft resources to were just unavailable. But Max Hairston, even when healthy, was never going to be anything more than the third best corner on this team. Part of that is because Trey White played well, but part of it is also because Max Hairston was never a guy who was good enough. The injuries hurt. TJ Sanders, even when he was healthy, never was an impact defensive lineman. Yes, he had to play out of position a few times too, but this pick so far is not something that I feel like is you can be optimistic about reasonably going into next year. Landon Jackson, yes, season-ending injury. I'm sorry. But when the season began and he was healthy scratch. How about the free agent ads that Brandon Beane had this year? Joey Bosa had a pretty decent first 8 to 10 weeks, and then late in the season, just not an impact player. Josh Palmer big money as a receiver. Yes, injuries were a factor. Josh Palmer did not once this year had more than 2 receptions in a game. Brandon Beane did not have a good year. Brandon Beane did not have a year that you would think merits a promotion. Again, you're not gonna base that all off of one season. But when you compare these two, it seemed logical to most of us, which is one of the reasons why most of us would tell you last week that no, McDermott's not going to get fired. That of the two, McDermott was the one who was more likely to return. I really thought if the Bills were going to make a change, the more likely path would have been moving on from Brandon Beane and keeping McDermott. Because you can fire the GM without upsetting the apple cart in the locker room. While players, I'm sure players would have said things like, yeah, we enjoyed Brandon Beane, did a good job, we liked working with him. He's a great guy. He really is a good people person. You can see why he rose up the ranks really quickly as a GM. But you can fire him, and the locker room will kind of keep cruising along the way they were going. By firing Sean McDermott, you have clearly upset the apple cart in the locker room. And the upshot of that is, all those players that Sean McDermott could bring in, the Shaq Thompsons, the Trey Whites, the Jordan Phillips, the guys who came back year after year after year, to the point where it became a joke. Oh, look, another guy's coming back to Buffalo. It happens all the time. That's going away now. The Bills, with whoever the next head coach is going to be, probably will not have Shaq Thompson as a linebacker. So now, most likely, the Bills' best linebacker from this year will not be a part of the team. Not that Shaq Thompson was a great linebacker. He's a guy in the back end of his career. The Bills can certainly move on from him and not be irrevocably hurt. But that's the kind of thing you're going to lose now, moving on from Sean McDermott. Doesn't mean it was the wrong call. Look, in this league, you only get so many chances. Sean McDermott got plenty. There is no one who's going to say that Sean McDermott got a raw deal in Buffalo. Maybe you could argue that this firing might, like I said, you can look at it from a different point of view and say maybe you're firing the wrong guy. Maybe it should have been Brandon Beane if you want to make a move. But overall, Sean McDermott got 8 seasons with Josh Allen. 5 or 6, depending on where you want to put Josh Allen's prime, with an elite quarterback at the top of his game. You had your chances if you're Sean McDermott. I don't think you look at what happens if you're McDermott and say that I didn't get enough of a chance. I should have gotten one more year. So from that point of view, I don't feel sorry for McDermott or want to criticize the decision. I get it. And there are a number of fans, obviously, that are throwing a party today. Fireworks, cake, candles, inviting the friends over, cracking some beers. Sean McDermott's gone. The wicked witch of the clap is dead. So I get where fans are coming from, and I get why people are okay with this. But the Bills are certainly losing something as a head coach. This is not any of the firings from the drought where a guy clearly had failed as a head coach and you had to try something else. This is a guy that's been good, that just hasn't gotten you to the promised land. Let's talk a little bit about what the players are saying. Like I said, there are a number of guys out there who have responded on social media. Some of the most popular one you're going to see is Jordan Phillips, who said, "This bleep is so stupid. It's so sickening. He's the best coach I've been around." Deion Dawkins said McDeasy is one of them ones. Dawkins said, "Until the grass meets us again," because it's Deion Dawkins. That's how he operates. It's awesome. Daquan Jones. Doesn't make sense. You got what you wanted. And clearly that's a reference to the fans who've been calling for Sean McDermott to be fired. Now, it's not crazy for players to be upset about their head coach being fired. It doesn't even matter. You've got guys who will have coaches who've gone 3-14 that will go on social media and say, "I love this coach. He's the best thing ever. They should have given him one more chance." So this is not unusual. But again, this is certainly a part of the deal. That the Bills, the thing that players talked about who kept coming back to Buffalo, or even guys who came to Buffalo for the first time, they talked about the atmosphere, the locker room, the culture that had been built. That was a drawing card. People like that. And sure, there will be a new coach and a new culture, and that might be just as enticing going forward, but it's going to take time to build that. It's going to be, you don't just walk in and flip a switch and all of a sudden you got a brand new culture that everybody loves. Players who have grown and have talked about how much they enjoy McDermott are going to be more likely to go follow him somewhere than to stay here in Buffalo with someone new. I don't think everybody will go. You know, you think about like Trey White's a guy who left and came back. Trey White probably still stays in Buffalo. But there will be a level of a type of player, an amount of players, a group of players who will want to be a Sean McDermott guy because of what they enjoyed under McDermott in Buffalo. It's going to be all different. Bottom line, look, I get the move. I understand why the Bills and Terry Pegula probably felt like something different was necessary. You can only bang your head against the wall so many times. But this is not a cut and dry, yes, we moved on to the new guy and this is going to be awesome. Maybe. Depends on who they hire. Depends on what's next. And let's talk about that right now. Who will be the guy that Terry Pegula will look to try and finally take this team where everybody thinks they should be in the Super Bowl? Well, first of all, like we said, Brandon Beane is the guy at the top now. He's the guy who has the call. He's the guy who's leading the coaching search. And because of that, because of Brandon Beane being at the top of the food chain, being the one who reports to Terry Pegula, because prior to this year, or the last setup was Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane both individually report to the owner. Now you're taking the organizational structure. The owner's at the top. Brandon Beane is next, and then the head coach will report to Brandon Beane. There's a number of candidates out there, certainly guys who have a reputation, who have built up some level of respect in the NFL that won't want to be a part of that. I know fans will look at this team and think, well, you've got Josh Allen and this team that goes to the playoffs every year. This has got to be the greatest opportunity for any head coach candidate. And for many, it will be. But another part of this for candidates is, what's my power structure? How much say do I have in doing what I want to do? Because, yeah, I have the quarterback, but maybe I want to run a 3-4 defense where McDermott ran a 4-3. Or maybe I want receivers who are more likely to be larger possession types than the small, speedy guys the Bills have right now. Maybe I want a whole different type of offensive line in terms of athleticism or strength or size. If you're a head coach candidate and you walk into Buffalo and you're already number 2 on the power chart just because of Brandon Beane being your boss, you're probably number 3 because Josh Allen is here and he's the guy that, again, carries the biggest say when it comes to probably what happens anywhere in this organization behind Terry Pegula. At the very least, Allen and Brandon Beane are probably on a very similar level when it comes to power and influence in the organization. So if you're a new head coach and you're thinking about, well, I want to do this, this, and this. Well, now you have to please Brandon Beane because he's your direct boss. You have to please the owner, Terry Pegula, because he's the next level boss. And you probably have to please the quarterback, Josh Allen, because he's the meal ticket, right? He's the franchise. Well, how much of what you want to do can you do now? Because you have to satisfy all these different masters. There will be a few guys that will look at it and say, you know what? Josh Allen's great, but I want to go do my thing over here with this other guy. And it will restrict the pool a little bit. So that is a concern for where the Bills are going forward. That said, there is an obvious candidate out there that I think makes the most sense, that would work a ton for the Buffalo Bills, and that's Brian Daboll. If the Bills add Daboll, you get a guy that already has that relationship with the quarterback, so he doesn't need to worry about the whole pleasing Josh Allen thing. He already knows how to do that. He's been here as a coordinator. One would assume that there's some level of amicableness with Brandon Beane. At the very least, he's comfortable with the structure. He knows where his office is going to be. He knows where to park. He knows the tenor of the town as a guy who's from here to begin with. So Brian Daboll would be a very logical person to drop into that spot. In addition, he's an offensive mind. which frankly is the better way to go in the NFL these days because your offense is what carries you to any high level of football. And if you have a defensive coach with a good offensive coordinator, well, at some point that coordinator is going to go want to be a head coach somewhere else. So now you got to bring somebody else in and you keep bouncing through the cycle. Look at what happened to the Tampa Bay Bucks going through 2 offensive coordinators with a defensive head coach the last 3 years. Look at what happened in Detroit with all that talent. Didn't matter much. Once Ben Johnson went to Chicago, Detroit couldn't even make the playoffs this year, fired their offensive coordinator from this season. Even with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Gibbs and Montgomery and Laporta and all those guys that have been such a sick machine over the last few years. So if you bring Brian Daboll in to be your new head coach, now you've got that problem solved. Now you don't have to worry about your offensive coordinator going somewhere else, finding a different job. You just leave that guy right here and let him run the show. And Daboll has proven that he can be a pretty solid coach. He went to the playoffs year 1 with the Giants. He made Daniel Jones work. Now, obviously, Daniel Jones worked this year with the Colts, so it doesn't look like as much of a miracle job as it did before Daniel Jones started 8-1 with Indy this year. But it still is a pretty good piece of work for a first-year coach on a team that didn't even exactly have a lengthy history of playoff success, at least in the recent vintage. So Brian Daboll, to me, is the easy choice. The other thing, too, with Brian Daboll is you can make a change without really going outside the organization. This is a guy that's familiar. Players know him. Front office staff know him. The owner knows him. And yet it's still a change. It'd be a big change because Brian Daboll has a whole different personality than Sean McDermott. Remember, at the very end of their relationship, things got a little frosty, right? So this is not bringing in another version of Sean McDermott. This is a brand new look, a brand new personality, a brand new guy to kind of be in charge of this. To me, Brian Daboll is the obvious odds-on favorite to get this job. Doesn't mean he'll be the one who does it. I've seen a lot of different names thrown out there, and you will probably hear from virtually anyone who is a big name. I don't know, hear from them is probably the wrong term. Hear any big name, especially guys who have won Super Bowls, will get mentioned for this job. I think Mike Tomlin is certainly someone to think about. John Gruden I saw thrown out there. I think that makes some sense. People have thrown Bill Belichick at me today. I wouldn't totally discount that, although I'd be kind of stunned if that's where the Bills wanted to go for exactly the reason I brought up. Bill Belichick's not going to come here and work under Brandon Beane. But because it's Sean McDermott, because the goal is the Super Bowl, all those names are going to be thrown out there, and I don't think you can dismiss any of them. But to me, Brian Daboll is the one that probably makes the most sense. I do think that if you're Terry Pegula, you're not making this decision without having a good idea of what plan B is, without being able to move on, being able to say, yeah, I'm going to fire the head coach I've got, but I'm not just going to throw it out there and land on coordinator X. I'm firing Sean McDermott because I'm pretty sure I can land this guy I really like. Or I'm pretty sure that if I give Brandon Beane the keys to this castle, he will land on this guy or this guy. Because if the Bills end up with coordinator X out of this, yeah, it could work. But to me, that's a terrible choice. If you want to get a coach whose job it is to bring this team to the promised land, to get it over the hump, you don't fire Sean McDermott and just grab whatever young up-and-coming assistant is out there. You go hire Phil Jackson. You go hire a guy that you know can get the job done. I know Brian Daboll isn't necessarily that, but he's probably about as close to that as the Bills might be able to get in their current organizational structure. But the bottom line is, this is not going to be a wide open search where the Bills interview 7 assistants and choose one of them. That's what the Browns do. That's what the Jets do. That's what the Panthers do. This Bills team should not be doing that. And if that's how this ends up, then to me, it's a colossal failure. Joe Brady is a name that I think is going to get thrown around quite a bit too. And I don't think if you're going to hire a guy that is not a huge name and does not have head coaching experience, because I think head coaching experience is going to be a priority for Terry Pegula in this as well. Joe Brady to me is probably the number one choice for that. Again, you can make a change without bringing someone in from outside the organization. Joe Brady, at least on the outside, seems to have a pretty good relationship with the quarterback. And Joe Brady absolutely will have no problem working under Brandon Beane in the new organizational structure of the Bills. I am not someone who is pro Joe Brady as a head coach. I would want Joe Brady to have a few more years as a coordinator before I give him that job. Now, sometimes you got to strike early to land that guy who's on his way up. Because if the Bills don't hire Joe Brady as their head coach now, and they feel like he's a good coach, he's not going to be here next year. Most likely. I guess there's a situation out there with the Bills, like maybe if the Bills ended up with Mike Tomlin, you could see Joe Brady staying. But I think the only way Joe Brady stays around, if you want him to be here as a part of the Bills, is you got to promote him to head coach right this second. I still think Dable's the guy. But I think it's certainly an attractive job, for sure. There will be a number of candidates who will have interest in this. And to be honest, I would think there'll be a name or two that'll kind of raise an eyebrow. Wow, that guy's talking to the Bills. Interesting. We talked a little bit about how the Bills ended up choosing Brandon Beane over Sean McDermott. And you wonder how that happened. It was pointed out to me by someone in the organization today. Don't forget that Beane is the one that sits in the owner's box every single game. Beane is the one that has the ear of Terry Pegula. He's the one that the owner hears about or hears from every single game. Not that Sean McDermott never talks to the owner. And remember, late in the year, there was talk about, especially when it came to how much McDermott raved over Jacoby Myers with the Jags. There seemed like there were veiled shots being taken at Brandon Beane by the head coach. And perhaps it's just how the league works. Remember, no matter how good a relationship a GM and a head coach have, they always know that their days are numbered. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to Brandon Beane in the offseason and we'll just talk about football or whatever. And Brandon Beane will always throw out kind of a humble gallows humor of, never know if I'll be here next year. If I'm still here. And I've always kind of said, Brandon, come on, man, you're doing a great job. You'll be here. But this is how these guys operate. So if you are aware, obviously, all the time, of the fact that you might be gone at the drop of a hat, you're going to try and protect your spot as much as you can. And that may be what Sean McDermott was doing, even subconsciously, just without even thinking, without even knowing, because your position, no matter how many playoff games you've won, how many division titles you've won, how many games you've won, you can be gone tomorrow at the drop of a hat. This is the life these guys lead. So when you're like that all the time, you protect your territory, you protect your corner as much as you possibly can. Even if you're not consciously thinking, well, I better say this today to make sure people understand that my team would be a whole lot better if we had Jacoby Myers. It doesn't even have to be that. It can just be something that you naturally do. And the deeper this organization got into this Super Bowl drought, if we want to call it that, the more the pressure seemed to mount on both these guys. Brandon Beane the last 2 years, just absolutely going off in the media about different things. It was the wide receiver rant this year, right after the draft with the Buffalo radio guys. The year before, it was the Josh Allen is underrated thing. And not that Brandon Beane was necessarily wrong, certainly about the Josh Allen one. I think the wide receiver rant proved incorrect this year based on how this organization, how the team went. But the point I want to make is Brandon Beane has been one of the better guys with the media. He's very mild-mannered, handles questions very well. To me, that stuck out, that he had one rant per season now about different topics. And my reaction was, I feel like the pressure of getting to a Super Bowl continues to rise and rise and rise and rise. And at some point, that pressure is going to burst. And maybe those outbursts were an example of that. Not even things that you look at and say, well, here's a person that can't handle it. No, this is how a natural human being deals with these things. And if the pressure is being ratcheted up and up and up, then if you're Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, at some level, you're going to want to do or say whatever you have to make sure you're not the one who's being talked about like we're talking about Sean McDermott today. And if that's happening, does that mean the relationship is not quite as copacetic as it was when you started here. Honestly, that's all me theorizing, but it's a theory that fits a number of the facts. And I do wonder if that's a part of why we got to what we got to today with Sean McDermott being out and Brandon Beane being promoted. All right, we're going to take a break. We got more to talk about this. We're going to get to the game from Saturday, too. I want to hit a little bit on certainly the Brandon Cooks call here with the interception and overtime and the thing that got people up in arms. But we will also talk more about Sean McDermott. He's out. Brandon Beane, he's up. And where the Bills go from here. My name is Thad Brown. You're watching the Endgame. This is Rochester First and WIVB Plus. We're back after this. I'm back here with you on the Endgame on a Monday. 2 days after the Bills were eliminated from the playoffs, Sean McDermott is out. Brandon Beane is now the president of the team. He will be in charge of the coaching search, and we are on coaching watch here for the first time in 9 years. I walked into the office today with Caleb Carr and Rachel Liebert, who work with me. Neither one of them were here during the drought. And I said, welcome to drought. This is how it works now. Out of nowhere, there's news that a coach is gone. You suddenly have a busy day. And now we're going to be on coach watch for the next week or so, maybe longer, waiting to see who the Bills interview and obviously who they end up landing on as the next head coach of this team. One thing I do want to point out quick is that I got to feel like Josh Allen was consulted on this, right? There's no way that the Bills did this without at least some sort of blessing from Josh Allen. At least a conversation. I can't imagine that Josh Allen found out on X this morning, the way the rest of us did, that Sean McDermott is out. He had to have been at least informed of the decision. Now, like I said, Josh Allen carries a large amount of power in this organization, but I never thought of him as a guy that would use it. When we debated what the Bills might do in terms of going forward, some of us in the media, would they fire Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, or both? If Josh Allen walked into Terry Pegula's office, slammed his hand on the table and said, Brandon Beane has to go, or Sean McDermott has to go, I think Terry Pegula would have listened. But that's not how Josh Allen is built. That's not how this guy rolls. You think about other great quarterbacks over the years, Dan Marino and Tom Brady come to top of mind for me when it comes to this. They are guys that do not mind cussing out a teammate on the sideline. They don't care how many cameras are watching, how many iPads get destroyed in the making of this rant. They will absolutely undress a teammate on a sideline if they feel like it's necessary, if they feel like it's the right choice to getting a play to go the way they need it to go. Aaron Rodgers, another one like this, who you will see do that. I don't think you're ever going to see Josh Allen do that. I don't care how unhappy he is with the player, what's going wrong. Allen is not that guy. Allen's leadership style is, I'm going to be your buddy. I'm going to make you feel good about being here. We're going to have a good time. You're going to like following me. And it works. It absolutely works. There's no one way of doing this. You can be the jerk and the kick ass and telling a guy that you've got to do it right or else X, Y, and Z, or you can do it Josh Allen's way. But Josh Allen is not the kind of guy who's going to walk into the owner's office or the head coach's office and demand a change. So no matter how unhappy he might be with Sean McDermott in theory, or Brandon Beane, or Joe Brady, or whoever the Bills hire next, Josh Allen is not, at least to this point, and I don't think he's just built that way, going to be a guy that's going to go in and rattle a saber to get somebody fired. So I would be stunned if Josh Allen, this was his idea. I highly doubt that. But again, I think Terry Pegula had to at least have included Allen in the process and said, this is what we're thinking about doing. How would it grab you? And like I said, going back to how Josh Allen is built, even if he doesn't like it, and I got to feel like Josh Allen is incredibly upset about this right now. You saw what he was like on Saturday, right? I let the team down. There's no way Josh Allen right now is not sitting at home thinking, I got my head coach fired. I guarantee that thought has gone through his mind, which is not fair at all. As we know, Josh Allen has done way more good things than bad things, as bad as that game on Saturday was for him. But he is most likely taking this very personally that Sean McDermott is gone. because of how he's built. And like I said, no matter who the next head coach is going to be, Josh Allen will have to be on board with that too, to a degree. I think Josh Allen's going to be the good soldier. He's going to do what he's told. He's going to do it to the best of his ability. And that's why people around here love him. That's how like I said, there's a number of different ways to become a leader that everybody wants to follow. This is Josh Allen's way. It works really well, but one of the side effects of that is this is not a quarterback that's going to go in there and demand change, even if it might be warranted. And now Josh Allen, for the first time in his career, is going to have to work with a new head coach. And like I said, players, for the most part, you deal with your quarterback coach first and your offense coordinator next if you're a quarterback, and then the head coach. But more likely than not, all three of those positions are going to be different. Josh Allen's gone through different coordinators. He knows how to deal with different coaches. This won't be a huge shock to the system, but it will be a new relationship that has to get built. And to that point, yes, Josh Allen might not be a guy who wants to rattle his saber and make a change just because this is how he wants it. But the older Josh Allen gets, I would imagine the bigger the desire for him to finally win a championship. And if they bring somebody in that just doesn't work, we might be doing this song and dance again in a year or two. So many moving parts to this, so many different things that go into how you change an organization. Fans look at it as Sean McDermott must go, and suddenly things will get better. It doesn't work that way. It's not just about plopping another guy down, having him open up his book of X's and O's, and things will get better. It's about how do you get along with the quarterback? How do you get along with the general manager? How do you manage people? How do you build your culture? How do you attract free agents? And like I said, the Bills are starting this from behind because they made their change 2 weeks after most other teams do. The two guys, if you ran this back, let's say the Bills missed the playoffs and they fire Sean McDermott, you can guarantee John Harbaugh would be interested in this job. You can guarantee Kevin Stefanski would be interested in this job. Those guys are not available anymore. So the Bills, again, have to go to the head coach aisle that's been picked over a little bit. They will find somebody they like. I think they will find someone certainly with a reputation, someone with credentials that will seem at least a little bit appropriate. I'll tell you this, and I was talking to the guys in my office about this today too. If they make this move and end up on random coordinator at X, then they blew it. Then this was a mistake. This cannot be a move to just go out there and find some dude who's been an assistant who's never been a head coach before. This has got to be a move that's made to land on a name. Someone that you feel like this, oh yeah, that guy. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. They're getting him? Okay, yeah, I could see that working out. Someone brought up Robert Saleh. I've heard that name thrown around a little bit. I do think that even with head coaching experience, someone like Saleh, who comes from a defensive background, whose credentials are similar to Sean McDermott. He's a motivator. He's a culture guy. I don't think that's the way the Bills would go. I think you want to bring in someone who's a little more offensive based, someone who's a little more of a scheme guy after McDermott. That's generally what teams do is when you have a guy who's like A, then you go with B. If you get the players coach, then you're going to come in and get the discipline guy afterward. Or if you have the discipline guy, you're going to bring the players coach in afterward. So going McDermott to Robert Saleh wouldn't make a lot of sense for me, even if he does check the box of he has prior head coaching experience and probably would work under Brandon Beane. All right, let's talk a little bit about the playoff game on Saturday, because up until this morning, that was the only thing anyone wanted to talk about. Most fans spent all weekend going Zapruder film on the Brandon Cooks catch. And I talked to dozens of them. I had a long flight. I had a big layover in Detroit. Plenty of time to be on X, going back and forth with fans, debating the minutia of the catch rule. And the thing I landed on coming out of this is that play was not only probably called right, it was obviously called right. I looking at it now, I'm very surprised at the amount of questioning that play has gotten over the weekend. Not only from fans and media, but from the Bills and players on that team. The Bills and head coach Sean McDermott, former head coach Sean McDermott. the way that rule is written, that catch rule, although in practice and applying it, it gets quite confusing. There's a lot of small pieces in there that you can say, I don't know if that's what the rule says it is, but okay. But when you read it off the page on the rule book, it's not all that complicated. To make a catch, you need possession of the ball. You need 2 feet or a knee or something down. And then you need a football move. Or at least time to make a football move. Well, when you look at that Brandon Cooks play, for sure there's possession. For sure there's a knee down. But is there time for a football move? I don't think it's even close. He lands on the ground and pretty much immediately loses control of the ball. And then the ball bounces up in the air and ends up as an interception. There's not really much time he has the ball. I'm firing up the rule book right now so we can actually, here we go. So this is what the NFL defines in the rule book as the third part of making a catch. A player has to clearly perform any act common to the game. For example, extend the ball forward, take a third step, tuck the ball away and turn upfield, or avoid and ward off an opponent, or maintain control of a ball long enough to do an act common to the game. So let's go through them all. All right, ready? Did Brandon Cooks extend the ball forward? No, he didn't. Did Brandon Cooks take a third step? Obviously not. Did Brandon Cooks avoid or ward off an opponent? No, he's just holding on to the ball. Did Brandon Cooks tuck the ball away and turn upfield? No, remember, it's both. People have talked this weekend about Brandon Cooks tucking the ball away as a football act. It says right here, tuck the ball away and turn upfield. It's not one or the other. You got to do both. So tucking the ball by itself is not an act common to the game. And then finally, does he maintain control of the ball long enough to do so? No. The moment he lands on the ground, that ball is gone. And I know people will say, well, the defender ripped it away. There's no note in this rule book that says the defender ripping the ball away allows Brandon Cooks to not have to follow these 3 rules. Brandon Cooks never completed the catch, never did all the things he had to do to make a catch. And there have been a number of examples, wildly enough, some of them came from this past weekend, of people pointing to plays to say, well, what about that one? The first thing that you got to understand is that the knee being down, which is what the Bills were talking about all weekend long, Saturday into Sunday. He makes a catch, the knee is down, he's touched, plays over. That doesn't mean anything. The knee being down does not complete a pass, does not complete the process of a catch. It has nothing to do with catching a football, other than whether that knee is located inbounds or out of bounds. So why Sean McDermott and the Bills continue to harp on the knee being down as something that ended a catch or made a catch official is mind-boggling, because there's nothing in the rules about it. If that's what they thought, then they blatantly had no idea what a catch really is. And I know there are a number of fans and media who agree. And frankly, I made that mistake on Saturday, thinking that that might be how you define a catch. That's not how it works. So if you want to argue that Brandon Cooks made a catch there, you've got to argue that he had enough time to perform a move, a football, an act common to the game. And I know there were so many other plays that people pointed to. Let me go through them real quick here. Devontae Adams and the Rams had the ball longer, had enough time to perform an act common to the game. And the Xavier Hutchinson one, Patriots and Texans, Sunday early. That's a play where he had 3-4 steps before the ball came out. So again, he had completed the process of the catch. Khalil Shakir, the sliding catch against the Patriots that people pointed to. Again, a situation where he had the ball, had possession of the ball longer than Brandon Cooks did. And even with the Shakir one, keep in mind that the Patriots never challenged that play to see if he really had possession all the way through that slide, because there was going to be a pass interference on the play anyway. And it wouldn't matter if they'd won the challenge and the Bills take the penalty and the ball's still in the same place. So why burn a challenge? So if you point with Shakir and say, well, why was that one called a catch? The answer might simply be because no one challenged it. The Aaron Rodgers play that people are pointing to, the ball that pops up in the air and Rodgers grabs it. I will admit that one's a little tougher to just say, well, that's absolutely not a comparison for this play. It's a weird play, first of all, because you don't have many receptions in the NFL where the ball is literally coming straight down on your head. But what I believe the NFL is trying to call on the Aaron Rodgers play is that Rodgers jumps up in the air, has the ball over his head, and has completed possession. In other words, he has it long enough so that you have time for him to make an act common to the game. Then he gets pushed to the ground. And although the play was initially called an interception, and I think one of the problems with the Aaron Rodgers play is that because it was called an interception initially, people think, well, therefore it must still have been a pass when the ball came out. And if you're saying, well, the knee negates the interception, then that must be an example of how the knee can complete the act of making a catch. And therefore, if the knee can complete the act of making a catch, Brandon Cooks must be good. No. The fact that Rodgers' play was called an interception initially is irrelevant. That play never happened. The NFL is telling you that he never lost control of the ball as part of a turnover. So just forget that. It doesn't exist. So now if you look at the Rodgers play, he catches the ball over his head, lands. The NFL is saying that he has completed the process of a catch, that he has had enough time to where he can make a football move. And then when he falls to the ground and the knee hits, the knee doesn't finish a catch, it prevents a fumble. Same thing for Davante Adams. The league is ruling that he had enough time to make a football move after making the reception. He didn't actually make a football move because he's got two defenders on him from each side and he can't literally move. And then when he goes down and the knee hits, the knee does not finish the catch. The knee prevents a fumble. And that is the difference that needs to be understood with this. Again, the knee going down does not complete a catch. All it does is prevent a fumble. And every time the league rules that a guy had a ball and the team keeps it, they're saying that the knee being down prevented a fumble. With Brandon Cooks, he never had possession of the ball long enough. So now, because the ball is out, there can't be a fumble because there never was possession. So it's either going to be incomplete or an interception, or if it somehow got back to Brandon Cooks, still a reception. And because Jaquan McMillan was the one who caught the ball before it touched the ground, it becomes an interception. And after having 48 hours to look at it and to study it and to look at the rule and how it's applied, you can certainly point to a couple of these other plays, the Aaron Rodgers one in particular, and kind of scratch your head and say, how did the NFL rule that? But with Brandon Cooks, I don't see how the NFL could rule anything else. As was pointed out a number of times, I was listening to the Athletic Football Show, which is a really good podcast, really deep in the weeds about football and schematic stuff and X's and O's. All three of those guys kind of shook their head at the play and said, I don't know how it would have been ruled anything else. That absolutely looks like a ball that is not completed. And for the fans who pointed to this player, the two plays that happened on Sunday and said, look at Xavier Hutchinson or look at Davante Adams. That's exactly the same as what happened with Brandon Cooks. You know, the play that was exactly the same as what happened with Brandon Cooks was actually a different Xavier Hutchinson catch in that New England-Houston game, or actually not a catch, an incompletion. It's the same play. He jumps in the air, lands on the ground, falling to the ground, has a knee down in possession, right? Same thing as Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks is down and has possession. Therefore, the play should be over. Xavier Hutchinson had the same thing happen over the weekend on a different play. But when he hit the ground, the ball bounced out and it was called incomplete. That's how that play should be ruled. And on Saturday night, on our postgame show, I talked with Josh Reed. And I was very adamant that while I thought the Cooks play was probably called correctly, I thought Sean McDermott had a point about the replay going really fast, that there should have been more time taken on that play. And I still believe the NFL was wrong to just roll right through that play as if it was obvious. That, as Sean McDermott said, when you have players and coaches who are pouring their guts out for this game, take a minute, take a couple minutes, look at it a few times. Even if you're just doing it for cosmetic reasons. to just provide the assurance to players and coaches and the fans who spend money that what we are doing is above board. We are making every effort to make sure that we get the call right. Even if you in New York look at that play and say, "Meh, that's good. I like that. Yeah, I know what happened there. We're fine." Take the time. I still think that would have been the right thing to do. But after spending the weekend looking at the rule and how it's applied and how it works, I can understand the NFL blowing right through that replay. There's not a whole lot to see there. Brandon Cooks goes up in the air, lands on the ground, the ball pops out. That's an incompletion 100 times out of 100. And it's not even a question. And for Sean McDermott to feel like he needs a timeout to look at that again, that's not a coach who's doing his job. That's not a coach who's aware of the rules. And for all of these players on Sunday, some of them might just be defending their guy, going with the company line, saying the thing that they feel like, maybe still being a little upset about the loss and just trying to latch on to something to make you feel a little better about it. But for all of these players to feel like there was even a question with that rule after looking at it for the weekend is kind of surprising, because it is not close. It is not any sort of indecision or uncertainty. That is never a catch, because Brandon Cooks never comes close to the third part of what you need to have a catch, which is an act common to the game or time enough to do so. Now, if you want to point to a couple of the other ones that people are using as comparison plays, like the Devontae Adams play, I don't think Adams has possession a whole lot longer than Brandon Cooks. Actually, at some point this weekend, I want to get both pieces of video out and actually go frame by frame and see how long each player has possession. But it's long enough, and it is longer than Cooks. I don't know where we all got the idea on Saturday night that a knee being down and a player being touched ends a catch. It's not relevant or accurate or anywhere close to the way the rule is written. So for anyone out there, and this is even for Bills fans, because there were thousands of non-Bills fans who weighed in and said, that looks like a catch to me. It's just not the truth. It's not how the rule is written or officiated. And there have been, Gene Steratore on X has done a good job explaining it all weekend. I saw Walt Anderson, I think on either NFL.com or ESPN, kind of lay out why the rule was called the way it was. And I know, look, when you're on NFL.com, there's only so far you want to trust that, because that is state-sponsored media, right? I get that. That makes sense. But if you don't believe any of them, go read the rule book. I have always said that NFL rules are too detailed, too involved, too difficult for the average fan to understand, even the average reporter to understand, because you need to really spend time with this to digest a lot of what the NFL wants to do when it comes to officiating their game. This one really, when you read it, is not super hard. And I know there's an addendum, by the way, too, about if a pass is called simultaneously. Let me read that here. If a pass is called simultaneously by two eligible opponents, both players retain it, the ball belongs to the passing team. It is not a simultaneous catch if a player gains control first and an opponent later gains control. If the ball is muffed after a simultaneous touch by two such players, all the players of the passing team become eligible to catch the loose ball. That last line, if a ball is muffed. Now, the ball wasn't muffed here. I take that back. The definition of muff, I'd have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure the definition of muff is exactly what happens to Brandon Cooks here. He loses control. So what they're saying here is that anybody on the passing team can catch it. There's a rule about you, like an offensive lineman can't be the first player to touch a ball. If you had a situation where two guys came together, had simultaneous possession, and the ball bounced away, your tackle could theoretically catch it and it would be legal. But for the rest of what happened in this Cooks play, the simultaneous catch rule has no bearing on this, because Cooks never caught the ball. He never completed the act of the catch. And again, it wasn't even a debate. And why I was wrong too, thinking that it was a catch or that it could even be a catch. It was not. It was never a catch. It was never going to be a catch. And while we all thought this, why so many media, I mean, I get it, it looked like a catch visually. It's not even a debate. So what happened on that play is unfortunate, It was a pretty damn good play by Jaquan McMillan. Let's give that man some flowers for coming up with an interception on a play where Josh Allen threw a pretty darn good ball. But it was not a bad call by the officials. It wasn't a misapplication of the rule. It wasn't an example of inconsistency. It was an easy rule called exactly the way it should have been called. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Endgame. We'll be back again on Thursday talking more about Bill's coaching search, I'm sure. The news is only beginning with this. Bill's probably will talk to everybody tomorrow or Wednesday is the expectation. Remind you, you can a reminder to see BKL Nightly here on Rochester First, WIVB Plus. We'll have more on this coming up later tonight. Thanks for watching. I'm Thad Brown. We'll see you again on Thursday.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 On Demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.